All right, welcome to another deep dive, everybody. Today we're tackling one of those passages that always seems to stir up a bit of debate. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know the one.
It's 1 Corinthians 7.2638.
The marriage and singleness debate.
That's the one where Paul really dives into those big questions about marriage and singleness, but we're going a little deeper than just surface level this time. We really want to unpack what this means for you today.
Well, and what always gets me about this passage is how relevant it still is. Like even today, I mean, people are still trying to figure out these same issues.
Yeah.
Commitment, priorities, relationships.
Oh, yeah.
Like it's almost like Paul had a time machine
Right.
and like saw all of our like modern dating apps and all that stuff.
Oh, absolutely. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's set the stage a little bit.
Yeah.
So Paul is writing this letter to the Corinthians, but Corinth wasn't exactly known for, like peace and quiet, was it?
Oh, no, no, no. Not at all.
What was it like?
It was a wild place. It was this major port city.
It's kind of like, people have called it like the Vegas of the ancient world.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So yeah, it was known for its, well, let's just say its vibrant culture.
Right, right.
And all sorts of philosophies and social norms going on. I mean, I think even TikTok drama would seem pretty tame compared to what was happening in Corinth.
Wow. Okay, so we're not dealing with some generic relationship advice here. This is like specifically tailored to this audience with their own issues.
Exactly, yeah. And that's what I think makes, verse 27 just stand out so much.
Okay.
Because he just comes right out and says, are you married? Don't seek a divorce. Are you unmarried? Don't go looking for a wife. But what's interesting is that he's not saying like, oh, one's better than the other.
Fair.
It's more about what's right for you. And, how does that work with, your walk with God, that kind of thing.
That's a really, if you think about it, it's kind of a progressive viewpoint for back then.
Yeah, it was. You know what I mean? To give people that freedom of choice in a society that was probably, pretty heavy on the pressure to get married.
Yeah, it was pretty radical for its time. Like you have to imagine what that would have been like for those early Christians to hear that, right?
Yeah.
But then just a few lines later, verse 28, he kind of throws this curveball in there.
Oh, yeah?
Where he talks about marriage, having all this trouble in the flesh.
It does. It makes you kind of wonder, like, is he backtracking a little?
Right.
Like, wait a second. Is marriage a good thing or a bad thing?
It's like, oh, man, now I'm not so sure.
Right. What do you make of that?
Well, I think he's just being, real with them. Marriage isn't a sin. It's not like he's saying, oh, don't get married.
Right.
But he's saying that it does come with its own set of, challenges and responsibilities.
Yeah.
And those are going to be different for everyone. Like today, it could be financial stress, family stuff, even just trying to make your schedules match up with your spouse.
Oh, yeah.
So he's not trying to scare people off from marriage.
Right.
But I think he just wants to be, honest about what it entails.
Okay. I can see how that kind of honesty would be, valuable back then.
Yeah, I think so.
And even today, really.
Yeah.
Then he takes a little bit of a turn, verses 29 through 31.
Oh, yeah.
He goes a little more philosophical.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about the time is short, and he's urging people to live with like an eternal perspective.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Like, how do we even begin to like process that?
Right.
That idea.
Well, I think he's just asking us to like step back for a second.
Okay.
And look at the bigger picture. This life with all the good and the bad, it's really just a small piece of eternity, right?
Okay.
So his question is, how does that affect the choices we make? Like, especially when it comes to our relationships.
So it's not like, ignore your earthly life completely.
No, not at all.
It's more about viewing it through like a different lens, right?
Exactly. It's like, yeah, we're here, we're living our lives, but we got to remember that our real purpose, it goes beyond all of this. It's kind of like thinking about investments. Like, are we investing our time and energy in things that are actually going to last?
That's a really interesting way to think about it.
Yeah, it is.
But then how does that eternal perspective like fit with what he says in verses 32 to 34?
Yeah.
Where he talks about, how being single lets you have this undivided focus on serving God.
Right.
Doesn't that kind of contradict this whole freedom of choice thing?
Yeah, that's where it gets really interesting. And this is one of those places where you got to be so careful not to take Paul's words out of context.
Okay.
He's not saying married people can't serve God with, their whole hearts.
Right.
But I think we also got to be honest. Marriage does come with a lot of demands, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And that can sometimes pull us in a lot of different directions.
So it's not that married people like can't focus on God.
Right.
It's more like they have a lot of other things competing for their attention.
Yeah. Think of it like this.
Yeah.
If being single is like having this laser focus, right? Like really focused on one thing.
Right.
Marriage is more like trying to juggle like 5 things at once.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Yeah, they both have their strengths, right?
Right. Right.
But they each need like a different approach, a different way of doing things.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And then in verses 35 to 38, we see Paul kind of, giving really practical advice.
Yeah.
And I think it shows just how much he cared for his community, because he's talking about social pressures, personal convictions, even what to do if you're, feeling conflicted about a relationship.
Oh, yeah, totally. He gets it. Like, he understands these are, like, life-changing decisions,
Right.
And he wants to equip people to, approach them with wisdom.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, here we are, all these centuries later, still trying to figure out these same questions about relationships and commitment and, living a life with purpose.
It really is amazing.
It's crazy how relevant these ancient words still are,
It really makes you think, though, doesn't it? Like, if Paul was writing to us today, like, in our world with, Tinder and ghosting and everything else going on,
Oh, man.
how do you think his advice would be different? Like, what would he say are, like, our modern troubles in the flesh,
Right.
And how can we possibly hold on to that eternal perspective in the midst of all this?
Those are some really, really good questions to think about.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hopefully this gives you plenty to, chew on and ponder
Yeah, lots to think about.
as you continue to explore this for yourselves.
Absolutely.